Thank you very much, Thomas, for this kind introduction. And I have to say also, it's a great pleasure for me to be finally back in person in Prague. And, of course, we think we've followed each other's work over the years as well. But in person, I think it's still much nicer. So I'm going to talk about governance and ethics of AI, and in particular about the current status and the challenges that we face globally at the moment. The point is, I could always revise this talk each day, actually, because there's new developments, new challenges arising, but we will see, and we will be able to talk about that, of course, in the discussion. Let me start by an event that you have certainly also witnessed last year. Is something that cannot be overestimated. At the Hiroshima summit, the G7 summit last year, there was a kind of a declaration by the global leaders about AI governance. And that is something extraordinary, that such a topic is so high on the agenda on the global agenda, where the leaders in Hiroshima acknowledged that there is a common vision and a goal of trustworthy AI, even if the details may vary. And this is also something that should not be neglected. The details vary indeed, and there are different ways and different thoughts about how this should be. But in general, there is a vision that we should update the governance of the digital economy in line with our shared democratic values, such as democracy and human rights. And I think this is an important point. Even though one also has to say G7, of course, does not include all big countries of the world. It's a certain part of the world. But still, I think it's important to see. Because with AI governance for a number of years already, the question is, what's the right direction? And of course, we have three key players. We have the US, we have China, and also the EU, hopefully still. And so if you look at some of the headlines of the past 2 years, EU takes major step toward regulating AI. And of course, I will talk more about this later on. China's approach to AI regulation. Should we pause giant AI experiments? There were actually several open letters about that. A lot of discussion, and question where we should go. But before going further into this, I would like to introduce a bit more, my institute. Since last time when I was here, actually had just been founded, but there was no staff yet. There was only me basically, and I can talk a bit about what it does. So it's an institute at the Technical University of Munich. We support and coordinate interdisciplinary research about AI ethics, basically. And what I would always like to emphasize about our work is that we work together with the technical disciplines. So in all, or maybe almost all our research projects, we have people from the technological side, like from engineering, computer science, medicine, working together with people from non-technology, from ethics, from law, from governance, psychology, and so we are not exclusively, say, on the philosophy side, as some other institutions are, and also not exclusively technical side, which are also some other institutions. These are our current research clusters, and I was asked to talk a bit more about them. For example, AI and the future of work. So this includes several projects. By the way, you find this on our website. Ethical aspects of AI in the workplace, something we have been working on for some time. For example, we have a project that was about AI in the hiring process, and how about how ethical guidelines, for example, and other tools and aspects in general of AI in hiring should look like. And there was a very new piece of work at the time. Mobility and safety, of course, includes in particular autonomous driving ethics, where we just concluded a larger project, as with other people working on this sector at the moment. I think there is some kind of pause maybe and waiting for further technological developments in the sector, but it's still a very, very important area, and I think we made some good progress. I will talk about it in the Allianz Arena in a few weeks, by the way. Maybe you have seen it on my page. So it's still something that generates a lot of interest, but also other aspects of mobility, like, for example, smart cities is also included here. Choice and autonomy. This includes projects in particular about projects about what decision power we want to retain for ourselves and what decision power we want to give to the systems. It's mostly a number of technical projects from mechanical engineering people, or logistics, and others. Then there is the field of healthcare. Of course, there's a lot of interest in the sector, ethics in healthcare. And when we started in 2019, I was mostly talking about, or asked to present about, for example, digital image processing of cancer images, also about robots, surgery robots, and so on. But now it's actually a lot of ChatGPT and generative AI. And I was asked 3 times in the last month to talk about medical conferences about what changes does generative AI bring for doctors. I think they're much more worried about that than other things. Online behavior, those are several projects with colleagues from computer science in particular about online behavior on social media platforms. And originally it was about firestorms, as they are usually called on Twitter, but those were projects from a number of years ago. Now these data are actually not available that much anymore. But again, it's about as it says, online behavior, governance and regulation is quite an active cluster at the moment, with a lot of work on the AI Act, which I will talk about later as well. And sustainability, it's very important. It's very important growing cluster together with people from, for example, Earth observation. There are a lot of ethical issues we are looking at in a project on AI in Earth observation. If we have time, I can go more into the details here. Also in AI and agriculture, and a number of others. Again, if we have time later on, I can also go into the details of some concrete projects later. And we have founded, as some of you have seen, we have a global AI ethics consortium with, this is not the actual number, it's more than that, universities and research centers across all continents, and a particular a network with a focus on Africa. And this is quite interesting how much work is being done, not just in AI, but also in AI ethics in governance in Africa. And we had several events and other projects going on there. And also, if you're interested, there is an online AI ethics course system which we developed together with the GovLab at New York University. It has, I think, around 40 or 50 modules currently. So it's a diverse collection of AI ethics modules that can be found free of charge on the internet. And last, we have a conference format that is regularly held. First, actually, the first one was online. That was planned for originally for 2020, then postponed to 21, and then went virtual. And the second one was in 23. Last year, finally in person again. And we will have another one next year, 25, and then probably all 2 years. But they might not always be in Munich, actually. Because we have a number of partners here with whom we might do them elsewhere as well. Now let me talk a bit more about the ethics of AI, because I think this is still underestimated in the debate. We're talking about a lot about the challenges of AI ethics, but there are also opportunities, ethical opportunities of AI. And here again, I said before, the surgical robots. This is something, for just one example from the healthcare sector or medical sector. They would create a lot of benefits, certainly. and not just opportunities in business terms, but assisting human surgeons by supporting the ability to see or create precise incisions, minimally invasive, stitch wounds, and so on. I was surprised myself that a lot is already being done in fields like gynecologic surgery, prostate surgery, head and neck surgery, where these systems are already helping. I mean, not conducting these on their own, but helping and assisting humans in a lot of fields. I think this is just the beginning of a lot of development that will happen here and continue to happen here. But in totally different, as I said, AI and sustainability is one of our clusters, and agriculture in particular. This is something that's also completely underestimated in Germany and probably in other European countries as well, how to increase productivity on a farm. Most people, at least in our country, would not think of AI in that case. But we have researchers, for example, from India or from Africa, as I mentioned before, where this is actually quite a big thing. For example, just simple things: analyze weather conditions, temperature, water usage, soil conditions. In particular, if you of course got much bigger pieces of land than you have usually in Germany, their AI systems can be of great help. Okay, I have to say one thing maybe, because this might be an issue among philosophers. How do I define AI? I have explicitly not given a definition here because we could talk for ages about that. So here I take a very broad approach to that, and we can talk later on what do I include in one. But for example, I do not make a sharp distinction between big data systems and AI systems. I don't think that makes a lot of sense, but that is something that can be debated certainly. But so that means we have very simple systems here, but also much more sophisticated ones. How to improve the accuracy of harvesting, for example. This is something where a lot can be done to detect diseases in plants, poor plant nutrition on farms, or creating models for seasonal forecasting in order to, again, to increase productivity and improve the accuracy. Endangered species, of course, this is something you've certainly also heard of. Again, it comes down to how to not just collect the data via certain sensoric systems, but also how to analyze these data and what to do with them. So, for example, there are a lot of camera traps around the world. We have millions of photographs that are there, but in order for them to get efficiently analyzed, we need certain systems that do that. And certain models, for example, we have that harness the best and latest in conservation technology to aggregate, analyze, and share the global wildlife data, because sharing is also something which is quite important. And you can't do that with AI. So maybe a species is endangered in one place, but not in the next country, how to share these data and how to make use of them, and to be much faster than just wait for ages. So ultimately, you do this in real life. I mean, this is something that would make quite a difference. Just to give some examples, and as I mentioned, generative AI before, I should also say that generative AI, for example. This is taken from a concrete study, can help simulate surgeries, and they are being used in the training of doctors, medical doctors, surgeries, and other medical procedures, also to improve the clinical education, if you want, for patients, to show them what can be done, for example, to make them understand better what the options are in difficult cases. right? Or enhancing the quality of care, in order to, for example, risk considerations I already mentioned. This is something where especially generative AI can help to generate not just some data or some predictions, some formula, but also already something that can be communicated to patients in order to make them make informed decisions. And diagnosis, of course, this is something that has been around for years already. How to scan certain images, the cancerous cells, and so on. And I don't have to go into the details here, but this is from a concrete project where ChatGPT is being used in quite a number of cases and situations, from simple things like record keeping, medical record keeping, to medication management, writing documentation, virtual assistant for telemedicine, and even maybe not decide about patient triage cases, but help in assisting such decisions. So that was a bit about the opportunities, and of course I have to mention one with regard to autonomous driving, of course, because we always bring up this autonomous driving if it works on the higher levels and if it manages to reduce the number of accidents and fatalities significantly, then it is also an ethical opportunity. But of course we also have challenges and risks. But I think, again, I would like to see this in a balanced way. Because I think over the years, and especially the last 5 years that I've been talking about this, it seems still the discussion is a lot about the challenges. And that's okay. The challenges are certainly there, but there are also other things. And you have to arrive at a balanced view, I think. Autonomous vehicles, yeah. Again, to talk about this, of course, for a long time. But I mean, the issues that I think are now the most, after some years, are now seen as the most relevant one is who should be responsible if there's a crash, and not just in the sense of ethical or moral responsibility, but who holds who has kind of duty to redress. What about accountant? Who is responsible in the company? Who has to pay for when something goes wrong? And the responsibility of organizations and companies ultimately. So, of course, this is something that the companies are very interested in. With, as I said, general AI is another example where I talked about the opportunities now. And of course, I can also talk about the risks. And again, they have to be balanced. What about the privacy of health data? When you train AI algorithms with these data, what is being done with them? Who has access to these data? Who can give them to whom? And so on. Are they reliable? Of course, this is not just in the healthcare sector, but of course in all kinds of generative AI. How reliable is the output of a generative AI system, of a large language model? And could, of course, present all sorts of examples. You know them. These results cannot just be taken for granted. And I think in a lot of cases, the users know that they cannot be taken for granted. So if you ask ChatGPT or any other GPT system a historical question, it might make some major mistakes or just invent something. We all know these examples. The question is, what's the consequence of that? What follows from that? There is certainly misinformation, but do we know it is misinformation? Okay. So it's certainly complicated. And in the case of medical advice, it might, if people really take that seriously and do not, balance it against other information they get, then can create a problem. And again, biases and lack of transparency. we know about the question of OpenAI, for example. We don't have a lot of information how these algorithms are being trained. Now this new model is out since yesterday, I think, and also again there's we don't know a lot about how these are being built, and I think it's the same with other systems like Grok or others. So certainly one has to see how, and that's a decision to make for society, if you want. How much of a problem is it? Mm-hmm. Is it a major problem with which we can live, basically, or is it a problem where we need to do something about it? So I'm just presenting this question here. Yeah, and now I think from a philosophical point of view, also some of the most interesting ethical problems or challenges, because they are within ethics. Well, because in these cases you have an ethical argument for this side and an ethical argument for the other side. For example, this is an old topic, certainly care robots. Do they endanger or preserve human dignity? And I don't know how the discussion here is, but traditionally and still actually in Germany, there is this view that they endanger human dignity, and you would rather have human care personnel. But there are also studies that show, and studies conducted with older adults who say, well, no, for certain tasks we would rather like to have a robot perform this task, and that would actually, for me, people say, not all maybe, this would help me preserve dignity. I would have more time with a human care person. So this is a question, and maybe it's a question that cannot be solved with one result across cultures. So there might be culturally different questions, different answers. By the way, these systems here, where people say, well, these are used a lot in Korea and Japan, not really that much. The robots they use in the care sector mostly are smaller ones, much smaller ones. I've talked to a lot of people in those countries, and so these exist, yes, but they are not very widely used. Bots, still a relevant question. Should bots be required to identify themselves? This is a question. This is an issue that we had already, I think, 1 or 2 years ago, at least, where studies showed that there might be a kind of trade-off between the function that the bot has to perform and the transparency it should give. So basically, people won't trust a bot if it identifies as a bot. Again, well, there is some evidence in an article from some years ago. Also, there's some others. But again, we have to see what to do about this. And this is quite similar to a question we have about autonomous vehicles. Yeah? Because should they be required to identify themselves to the outside as being in autopilot mode? And there are arguments, again, pro and contra here. Because, people might step in front of such a car and trigger certain behaviors. And for me, the relevant question is, would it make people more comfortable or not? And if you compare it to an airplane, so airplanes have been going on in autonomous mode for a long time. They can take off and land automatically. We still have pilots there. And would you like to know in each situation if the plane is in autonomous mode or not? As a passenger, would you like to know? So there might be different answers to this, but in general, for the moment, consensus, at least by those people who built these systems. And now we would rather like not to know, or it at least would not be of any advantage to the people, but would not make them feel more comfortable. So again, what is there really a value in these cars identifying themselves to the outside? I would say probably not at the moment, but this can be seen again different ways. So there is again arguments in both directions. Of course, this list could be extended for much longer. I just gave some examples. So now we would like to deal with the risks, but keep the opportunities, of course. And now I would like to just give some remarks about what has been done. So most of this will be familiar to you, but getting to the new developments here. Because I think the overall goal is to achieve something like trustworthy AI. It might also be called responsible AI. I think this is quite interchangeable, or ethical AI. A number of people don't like ethical AI for some reason, because I think it's trustworthy. It sounds more technical or more serious than ethical. Whatever. So, there is one dimension here of this trustworthy AI, which I cannot talk too much about today, which is the robustness aspect, which is quite technical. A lot of colleagues in the computer science field are working on that. And those are important problems here, of course. Although sometimes I have some problems because they are only looking at the technical side, but they have a lot of implications in other fields. So it would be good to look at these while also keeping in mind the ethics and the legal side of it. But anyway, so there's a robustness side. There's the ethical side, about which a lot of work has been done in Prague and in Munich, but also elsewhere in the last years. And there's the legal side of it. There are EU laws, there's a human rights declaration, and also member state laws. So about the AI ethics, I think I can be very brief here. There are a number of groups that have published AI ethics guidelines. I think that was the time until 2018, 2019, maybe. After that, it was broken down into more specific regulations, guidelines, which we also did. And then I think the legal side became more prominent, I would say. In particular, of course, with regard to the EU, there's the AI Act now, which is supposed to guarantee that these systems respect existing laws, fundamental rights, values, and so on. But I will come to that in a moment. But we have not just the AI Act, we also have a lot of regulations that were already in place. I mean, we should not forget about that. We have the GDPR. Maybe one or two of you have seen that Mario Draghi was recently in his competitiveness report made some very critical remarks about the GDPR, which is supposed to have decreased productivity by 15%, which, I mean, I'm not the one to argue with that, but it's in his official report. There's the Human Convention on Human Rights, product liability directives, consumer protection laws. So it can be said that we didn't have regulation on AI before the AI Act. We had, just not this kind of specific one. Yeah, how did it come about? So actually, in early 2020, we had someone from Brussels, Paul Nemetz, if you know him. He was speaking at my institute, and he said, "Oh, we will have this new AI Act by end of this year." So that was here. So it would have been here. So then of course came COVID, but still, so it took quite a while. There was a proposal in 21. A consultation period, which probably a lot of also in Prague gave input to. I'm not sure if that was read, but it was done. there was a common position by the Council, and eventually, in June 23, the European Parliament adopted their position on the AI Act. Then there was this, which of course happened between these, the trialogue process between Commission, Council, and Parliament, which ended. I don't see any really major changes that were being made, but that we can discuss. And it entered into force, actually last month, with a date of applicability, which varies, in different degrees, starting now. So that is, the timeline. Of course, you know about this. I think I don't have to say much about this. There's this risk-based approach, different layers of risk. High risk, it is here. I mean, a lot of discussion was mostly about these two. I mean, the minimal risk systems, for which basically not a lot was or is being required. There was discussion how much of the AI, of the total amount of AI systems do they compose. So there was very different figures. Some said it's 80%, some 60%, and others said it's much less than that. I don't see any reliable figure about this. Maybe it's not possible to come up with one. The unacceptable risk category, so systems that are not accepted in the EU at all. There's always a social scoring. We don't want a social scoring system like in China. I think there was not much discussion about this. Whereas when it, for example, came to the use of face recognition, there was a lot of discussion how much it should be used, how much it could be used by law enforcement authorities. I think there's still some discussion about how to implement this. But of course, then there is, of course, the category of high risk, and which includes a lot of systems, not just in fields like law enforcement and immigration, big question, but also, for example, the educational sector. All sorts of systems that are developed or being developed in the educational sector fall in this category and are subject to conformity assessments. So we had Dragoș Tudorache, the Romanian parliamentarian, who was chairing this, who was behind this AI Act mostly. We had him in my institute sometime last year, and we asked him, what does it mean? What are these conformity assessments? And he said, I don't know. They have to be developed. And that's basically still the status. There are a number of approaches now, also, for example, by auditing companies. But what it has done, certainly, it has created a lot of insecurity about what is the future for systems like these. So, and not just systems like very dangerous ones, but systems that would be used, for example, in the workplace or in schools. Where I think there's a lot of potential for generative AI, for example, to make the very general approach to education much more, to individualize it much more. And I think there's a lot of potential for generative AI, but we also have to let it happen. I'm just saying that. And then there's the transparency sector, limited risk. The kind of at that point originally the generative AI was not included, so it came in later on, and someone from the German ministry said, we had to include generative AI because it was so important. It came so late. Yes. So this is generative AI is actually, as you know, it's been around since November 22, and we are already regulating it in early 24. I think this very fast. Just if you compare it to other technologies, and it means, for example, for high risk system, mandatory measures like having risk management systems, having technical documentation, like with a machine, with any machine, record keeping, transparency obligations, but also this kind of human oversight, of course. Or human oversight, which is also not clear what it means for a concrete system. It can mean different things for different systems. What does human oversight mean for autonomous driving? So it cannot be done in real time, certainly. But some kind of mechanism that there's a human in the loop somewhere would have to be worked out. Yeah, and again, the generative AI came in late, and in particular, what was then the term all this general purpose AI system, a term that was then created and which applies basically to all sorts of machine learning. EU Parliament would say, well, no, we don't mean that. We don't, for example, we don't mean it to apply to the development, only when you put it on the market. But in practice, all the people that I've talked to and the companies that are doing say, well, but you can separate one from the other. If you develop such a model, then you have to, and when it comes, it's being put on the market, it has to be subject to certain constraints, and you have to already discuss those and include those in the development stage. So basically, it's quite a lot to design, test and analyze, include methods for reduction and mitigation of reasonably foreseeable risk. What is that? A reasonably foreseeable risk. It's a very broad term. Appropriate data governance measures, requirements to achieve appropriate levels of performance, predictability, interpretability, corrigibility, safety, and cybersecurity. How do you measure that? How do you enforce that? How do you know whether you have enforced it? How do you know if you are successful with that? Yeah. And no one really knows. The EU doesn't know either. But they still went ahead and did this. Well, and that's why I'm saying, in mid-23, there was a major letter of big European companies, for example, Siemens, Renault, Telecom, Airbus, but also a lot of others, signed a letter to urge the EU to adopt a more hands-off approach to AI regulation. Some of the arguments, some of the critiques were, and they were not just in the letter, but in general, was it might impede the EU's competitiveness and the innovation capability. The definition is very broad that they use, and that was criticized. It was not. They can say we didn't know. It is very broad, and you have areas like, for example, autonomous driving, where you certainly need a lot of regulation in order to put them on the streets. We also have a lot of regulation already, but what about generative AI? Is that really the same? That's why broadly working on AI is maybe not best idea. Then there's the second critique about SMEs. Yeah, small and medium companies might have a particular problem. As bigger companies, you have your compliance department, and the compliance department just ticks some boxes, and there's thousands of people working on these problems, and then you are okay with that. But for the SMEs, and this is a lot of potential actually for EU, it will be very costly. This is actually a point that has been repeated again by Mario Draghi just recently. We are killing our companies, he said. Yeah. And then with generative AI, again, there's a lot of potential in it. Again, why are we rushing at this point in time? Again, as I said already, that it's not even 2 years after it's here, and maybe it's better with regard to some systems, to wait and see what are the best ways to regulate it, and to first to do more research on it, because not every regulation is a good one. I think no one would say that. You have to have an efficient regulation, that the one that targets the problems, the real problems. So yeah, there are a number of critiques, and I have put forward some of these in some ministry roundtables, where I was invited to talk with the German digital ministry, and there were a lot of representatives from the SMEs in particular, larger SMEs, Mittelstand, German Mittelstand, and I was very surprised. They were even more critical than I was. So I expected a lot of people to say, no, we need all that. No, they were much more critical. So, but it achieved nothing eventually. So the EU went ahead. So, and if you look more broadly, the EU is not alone in the world. So Japan has said, well, we are taking all this very seriously: responsible AI, trustworthy AI, sustainability, societal well-being. But we will not go for a legally binding approach. That's what they explicitly said. We have a kind of softer AI governance rules. I mean, of course, and they hosted this thing in Hiroshima. We will have a different approach. Quite similar to what India then said. India for a long time did not talk very much about what they're doing. They are now saying they will develop standards for responsible AI to promote best practice approaches in order to foster ethical conduct, allow for innovation. Also, this is something that is, if you look at some headlines, so this and that country is going for AI regulation. Usually, it's about voluntary standards. It's about softer governance, and it's also about innovation. Just a few weeks ago, I was in Colombia at the Latin American AI Summit, and they had a declaration. They signed it, 17 or 19 countries, about going for innovation and governance. And again, also not for this kind of regulation that EU is doing, but also, again, softer rules. There are some exceptions to that. For example, Brazil is one that has a draft law that has, as far as I know, not been passed, but which would include more governance measures along the lines of the EU AI Act. We know about current developments in Brazil, which are also controversial, to say the least. But this might be an example. And the other example, which I have not here, is Canada also, which often also even stricter than the EU, which also has a draft law. Again, to my knowledge, it has not been passed, but which will also call for or implement more governance measures along the EU AI Act lines. So that is the situation. And of course, I didn't mention the US. Of course, the US, we have the executive order by Biden a few months ago, but it's not legally binding. It's kind of it's not the AI Act approach. It includes some implications, but nowhere near the AI Act. So, my way would have been to find a middle way, but I think it's probably too late for that. Basically, we proposed this in our 2019 paper of the AI for People, of which I was a member, to just go not just for a top down and not just for a self-regulation bottom up approach, but somewhere in between. Now actually we have a kind of top down approach, and I don't think it's a good idea, but it's probably too late to change that. Maybe not. Very recently, this is not just, does not apply just to the AI Act, but also the Digital Services Act, which I've talked on Twitter a lot about in the past month, where if you have seen this is also the discussion with Thierry Breton putting forward that if to Elon Musk, if you don't do certain things, change certain things about X and the way it moderates or doesn't moderate content, then we will take further steps. And after a lot of backlash in the next days, then the EU Commission and von der Leyen in particular said, well, no, he didn't have our backing. So he was on his own with that. Still, that's something that is something to watch. I mean, this is not my topic here, the Digital Services Act, but Digital Services Act, AI Act, and for example, Digital Markets Act, they are seen often as being something of some parts of a bigger picture. Okay. How much time do I have? I think I'm almost done. I could have I could speak about some implications at the end for the public sector, because that is often completely forgotten. And that's why I wanted to include it here. Because, for example, if you look at the Chinese approach to AI governance, and sometimes it's being said, look at what the Chinese have done. This is a great Vorbild, a great idol. We should follow this approach. But I mean, I don't know if that's the right way to go. And the Chinese had always excluded the public sector. So the Chinese AI governance only applies to the private sector. But we have, of course, a lot of use cases here: predictive policies, smart cities, fraud detection, by whom, for what. There's a lot of also very simple processes, natural language process. If you use it widely, in public administration, you will have to also consider a lot of problems, ethical problems about it. Changing legal status of individuals, for example. If you start automating this, you will run into all sorts of problems. So on different levels, national governments, subnational units, law enforcement, health, of course, allocation of budgets. It can be automated, or at least you can have a lot of AI in this. What does AI suggest, for example? So allocation of budget to the center for your center. What should be allocated there? Or my institute, of course. We are purely third-party funded institute, so we don't. It would not apply to us. So the use of AI in the public administration might unfold different types of adverse impacts, and some of these might be irreversible. That's also something that should be taken very seriously, because of course, you also have important implications in the private sector, but many of these, I'm not saying all, but a lot of these can be reversible. But here might be different. I have some examples. So predictive policing is something that was actually a few years ago. It was found not very long ago. It was ruled by the German Constitutional Court. I don't have the date here exactly. No, to be unconstitutional actually. The Security and Public Order Act for the Land Hessen and the Act on Data Processing for Hamburg were ruled as unconstitutional because this kind of automated data analysis that was in there violated basic rights. And that's quite interesting also to look at the details, which I don't have the time, of course, here. But so there are already courts that are doing this or that are striking down some of these things. This is another ruling of the European Court of Human Rights, which is was some years ago already. Maybe you know it, where, for example, that the indefinite retention of DNA of persons was ruled as a constitutes a violation of the right to privacy. Again, a lot of deep details, because that might not just be of relevance for DNA, but also for face recognition AI, for example. How long do you retain these data? And public surveillance in general. And then there's always the other people who would say, well, but if you don't retain the data, then it's useless. So it's complicated. So I'm not saying I have an easy solution, but there are now cases here in the public sector where we need to have certain things. If we take seriously a rule of law and constitutional rights, which I hope we do in Europe, then we need to look at, for example, biases, of course, in those, as we do in the private sector. We look at biases. They might discriminate against certain people for example, by allocating resources, denials of services for vulnerable groups. And I have to say, I take the definition of vulnerable here very broad. Not just saying these are just certain groups. I mean, it's also not good to discriminate against the majority. Anyway, right to effective remedy might be undermined if you don't have the kind of human oversight which we demand from the private sector, where we also need it here in the public sector. It's often forgotten. Of course, as we know, the public sector is monopolistic. It's in many ways, people do not have an alternative. And so we should be very careful there. The use of AI by the public sector does not only involve the IEAI Act, but also principles of public law, equality before the law, and constitutional considerations. So, I mean, normally this should be clear. Again, this is what I said before. We target developers again. That's not the intention of these AI acts and so on. But how do you implement it? How do you apply these systems? So this is something that not just in theory, but in practice should be looked at more closely. Proportionality. What is the proportional use of this technology? Not just where we have this tool and we use it and in any way we like. And it's very important especially in the public sector. Proportionality is a very important point here. And just some implications would be to perform risk assessments like you would have the private sector do, to understand use cases in more specific ways, to have procurement standards, also transparency and how you use AI, implementation of human oversight, right to remedy, and also kind of prevention of overuse of AI. The slippery slope is there. If you start using AI for certain tasks or other technologies, it tends to slip. You tend to slip. Yeah. So, and I would definitely recommend proportionality as a kind of yardstick to evaluate the normative implications of these systems in the public sector. We have some existing tools. For example, the high-level expert group devised this Altai framework, which maybe some of you know. Or there's the fundamental rights impact assessment that the Netherlands have used. The IEEE has developed several standards on ethical AI. Some one or two people of my institute are also involved in that. And there are some others. So these should be consulted. The court rulings, need to be considered on the limits of state interference in fundamental rights. And as, for example, with the DNA case, I think it should be already now looked into the implications, even if it has not been said this applies to AI, but it will. It's just someone needs to go to court about it. So maybe before that, bit preventive approach would be good. Yeah, I will conclude with my favorite statement because I always use it. I think in general, AI is a great technology. It's a very broad technology that will stay with us and will help us in achieving a lot of things which we could not have achieved without it. But it also will not be possible to use it without ethical considerations, because the users will just not use those systems if they don't trust them, and you won't sit in a car that you don't trust, and you won't go to a robot doctor if you don't trust them. So that's why I like to say AI will not fly without ethics. Thank you very much.